I made a ton of mistakes during my first Dark Souls playthrough, as you may have already inferred. But there's one that has stuck with me for a while. The first time I started the game up, I, God knows why, decided that I was going to kill the Asylum Demon, its thick thigh majesty itself, with the broken sword hilt, and no Estes. This is no feat by this point, but it did sound like quite a challenge, and since I was coming from Monster Hunter World, I wanted to challenge myself. Nothing wrong there, right? Right?
Nope. Chuck Testa.
Truth is, I didn't have a good grip of my actual abilities by that point. I was overestimating what I was capable of, based on my results on a different game that played very differently. And that led me to assume that I could pull that off without practicing or really knowing the game. And of course, when I inevitably failed, I was angry, frustrated, and looking for excuses. I somehow managed to cheese the fight by creating a second character and choosing the black fire bombs as a gift. But of course, that wasn't something I could brag about. Now, I wasn't a pro hardcore gamer, but had run away from the challenge I had set for myself. And the frustration that arose from that event pretty much set the tone for the whole run. Just because I hadn't achieved the perfect result I had envisioned. Thinking about it now, after reaching my new Zen state, and without all that negative emotion hindering my thought process, I've started to notice how that idea of perfection conditioned many aspects of my life since childhood, pretty much. From grades to relationships, that idea was always looming over my head and hampering my feelings of happiness, since I was always comparing my present situation with what in reality was an unattainable goal, which led me to being perpetually dissatisfied with my achievements. Of course, I didn't come up with that idea myself, I inherited it, which I'm pretty sure is the case for many of you as well. And just to be clear, I'm not inviting you to a pity party so we can set flames and feel miserable together while listening to my vintage Linkin Park and Evanescence radio mixtape. Not even close. But after thinking it over and over, I couldn't help but notice how that actually toxic idea has been passed down from generation to generation, all because, and I'm sure you've heard this one, if you don't aim for perfection, you'll be deemed as mediocre. Well, I have the hottest of takes for you. Are you ready for this truth pipe bomb? I bet you aren't, but I'm gonna drop it nonetheless. You can't handle the truth? I don't care. It's time for facts and logic, and your feelings won't stand in the way. We've been told for years that perfectionism is the antidote to mediocrity. Well, you've been lied to. What if I told you that perfectionism is what leads to mediocrity? Did I blow up your mind? Did I toast your elements? Anyhow, as I've said before, I am no psychologist. I just observe, ask questions, and think about things a bit too much. But I tend to believe that I'm not wrong when I say that aiming for perfection has held me back way more than it has motivated me. I can't count how many times I've decided against uploading something or actually giving a try to something new because my attempts aren't perfect. To give you an example, I made this YouTube channel on July 2020, and I have been trying to write a script for my first video ever since. I went through a ton of drafts while trying to create the perfect draft for a video. And it was throughout this process, while working in God knows what iteration of it, that it hit me. If I keep looking for the perfect draft, I will never make a video. I mean, let's say I somehow make the perfect draft. Then I would need a perfect voiceover, then perfect video editing and encoding. Then I'll upload it when I'm 60 and get 50 views and get depressed because I didn't get a perfect result after all that work. So, why bother? Let's just keep playing video, reading manga, and stop thinking about unhappy stuff. Aiming for perfection every time, at least in my case, has led me to fear of actually trying to do anything. Let's put it this way. Let's say this graphic represents your normal expectations. Let's be generous and say that in a scale from 1 to 10, 1 and 2 would be an absolute disaster. 3 to 5 would be boogers. 6 to 7, well, just works. 8 to 9 is better than expected. And 10 is nice. If you ask me, anything from 6 onwards is a positive result. 3 to 5 is far from ideal, but you did certain things right. And 1 and 2 would be an actual failure. So, with a set of normal, realistic expectations, a really undesirable outcome isn't as probable. However, when perfection is your goal, the graphic shifts just a little bit. Anything but a 9 becomes failure. And that's being optimistic, because 9 would be acceptable. This makes failure not only probable, but almost certain, leaving us with the prospect of never trying so we can avoid failure. And that is real, unadulterated mediocrity. So, how do we fix that? Allow me to go back to my script writing anecdote. I had the Word file open, and the more I thought about it, the more exasperated with my indecisiveness I got. So I said to myself, fuck it, this is good enough. That simple concept has been the driving force behind my efforts for the last few months. And it only took a simple shift in perspective, both in the assessment of my own capabilities and in the outcomes I consider acceptable. I only needed to understand that being kind to myself wasn't the same as being indulgent.
But relaxo, isn't that being mediocre?
Well, not really, my smooth-brained imaginary strawman. In fact, I believe the idea of good enough is more conducive to improvement than perfection will ever be. Let me explain. Accepting something as good enough means that you recognize that what you produced is probably the best or close to the best that you could have produced with your current abilities, and that is perfectly okay. You can always create something better or complete a task in a more efficient manner, but it is a process that implies doing it well enough over and over again. It is always a process, and there aren't any shortcuts. And that is the beauty of good enough. It isn't a static concept. My idea of good enough today isn't the same as the one I had a month ago. I've learned and improved in my craft, so I know I'm able to create something better. And I know I will be able to create something better in the future as well. Perfection teaches you to be ashamed of your failure, to the point where failure overshadows anything positive that could have come from your hard work. Good enough trains you to recognize failure to improve on it, but more than anything, to celebrate your small victories and be proud of your hard work without forgetting that you can improve. That is the sole reason I'm making videos and streaming now, and why I'm writing and drawing again. The idea of doing something good enough for myself has motivated me way more than the idea of doing something perfect to show off to others. And the idea of improving and doing something even better in the future with what I learned today motivates me to keep it up. I think that was my main takeaway from my experience with Souls-likes. Always aiming for perfection leads to frustration, fear of failure, inaction, displacing blame to external factors, anxiety, comparing yourself constantly with others, and overall mediocrity. On the other hand, good enough motivates you to celebrate your small victories and improvements, to recognize failure without feeling ashamed. Constant improvement led by inner motivation and actual introspection. A more honest assessment of yourself and your environment. And most importantly, it will help you get closer to your ideal than whatever perfection is supposed to be will ever be able to. Then again, this is just my experience and I can't stress that enough. But if you ask me to choose between these two bots to have my back, well, it wouldn't take me a split second. I'm sure I'd make a good enough decision.
¡Lo logré!
Thank you for watching. I hope you were entertained and that this video was a good enough follow-up to the last one. Like it if you enjoyed it, dislike it if you didn't. Maybe drop a sub to see what else I come up with. It's a free country. Sorta. Unless... Speaking of things, I've been streaming on Twitch as well, at twitch.tv/relaxogamingtv. You can find my channel in the description below. Right now I'm playing Judgment, and I'm more than entertained, so you may want to check that out. I'm also working on learning more about Dark Souls on the side to try my hand at speedrunning, but that's still an ongoing process. Anyhow, as always, it was a pleasure, stay comfy, this was Relaxo Gaming, and see you next time.